contrary to what you guys may believe, I don't enjoy beating up on you as much as you think I do. These recaps are mostly these days are done to help me in other areas as much as anything else. Of course, I do enjoy chopping you down in the process of that. But I also want to give you guys some information. I want to help you guys, and I want to tell you when I disagree with you guys wholeheartedly and when I think you're just being stupid fucking idiots. Luckily for me, that happens very often. I can't help it, guys. I apologize, but you do this shit all the fucking time. As you guys know, I am the co-commish of this league, so I'm able to see trades before they become official. So I noticed that a trade was sent by J-Ray to Joe, and the trade is as follows. J-Ray will send Tyrell Williams to Joe in exchange for Jacquizz Rodgers. Now, I do acknowledge that Joe's number one pick went down in David Johnson, and I understand that he wants to move certain things around, but this trade doesn't make any sense to me. What use would Joe have right now for Tyrell Williams, who seems to be a solid pickup because in his 2 games, he's got 5 catches in week 1, 54 yards and 5 points, 4 catches in week 2, 54 yards and 5 points. So the only thing that's stopping him from being a wide receiver 1 so far is 2 touchdowns. Had he gotten a touchdown or 2, then his weeks would have been completely different. Joe's not exactly struggling in the wide receiver department. He's got Emmanuel Sanders, who had a 2-touchdown game last week, and he's Emmanuel Sanders. He's always going to eat. He might not be a wide receiver 1 every week, but he's as solid a wide receiver 2 as you can possibly have. He's also got Sammy Watkins, who seems to be on a downfall. He's not as productive as we've seen him to be over the past 2 years, but he's getting catches both weeks. So it seems like he's still in the mix. Joe made this trade for reasons I don't understand. I mean, I would think that he would be trying to fill in a replacement for David Johnson. And it seems like what he's trying to do is he's trying to bump up Jonathan Stewart and maybe make him take his wide receiver 2 slot. But here's the problem. Jacquizz Rodgers got 19 carries in his first game last week against the Chicago Bears. Obviously, week 1, it was a hurricane, so that's a bye week for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He had 19 carries for 67 yards, 1 touchdown, 12 points. Why you would trade him away, I have no clue. Joe, I can only assume, saw the trade, didn't really review it, just said, "Oh, the hell with it. There you go, Jay." Which is pretty much what you would expect. I mean, I wouldn't expect Joe to counter. I certainly wouldn't expect that. But it's a trade that really doesn't make any sense. And from J-Ray's vantage point, the trade seems to be, it just seems to be something, just a bit of backup, I guess, if anything, unless he's fearful of Le'Veon Bell continuing to struggle the way he has, but you're not going to bench Le'Veon Bell. It seemed like it's just trading for the sake of trading. Michael Crabtree is right now taking up his slot in the wide receiver running back slot. Unless, of course, J-Ray is planning to move Devontae Adams to his bench and moving Jacquizz Rodgers into that third running back slot. That could be a possibility as well. But the winner of this trade is obviously J-Ray, because the upside here is Jacquizz Rodgers in a very fucking good offense, and he's going to see plenty of touches. The benefit of Joe is, I don't know, maybe Phillip Rivers finding Tyrell Williams here and there and, hope for the best. But in the meantime, wide receiver wasn't really what he needed to improve. But I digress. This is your week 2 recap. And as you guys would expect, Bundy is the best team in the league right now. As I always tell you guys, it's no different. You know, some of you guys may think that I get up here and I fucking talk all this shit, and what I say is pretty much, it's contingent upon who's in what position or what position am I in. No, it's no different. It's no different than last year when there were like 3 or 4 of you at this point that were like 2-0, and I was telling you guys to calm the fuck down. The only undefeated teams right now are me and Turtle Power. Turtle Power had a bye week this week, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But we are the undefeated teams right now. I have 220 points, and Orlando has 159. We are, of course, both in the number 1 division. So I am number 1, and he is number 2. If we move over to the El Caparel division, we have Pedro at number 1 with 214 points. Pedro's always pretty consistent. Pedro's always normally, you know, at the top of the division. The only problem with Pedro, and I say this with all the love of my heart, the only problem with Pedro is that he fucking sucks when it matters. You heard me, Dro. You fucking suck when it matters. So he's got the number 1 spot in the El Caparel division, and Joe, surprisingly, is number 2 in the very same division. Now, I say Orlando got a bye week because Hensel. Now, if you guys will take a look at Hensel's team, you'll notice that he has 2 names under his fuck you title. He has Hensel Mercedes and Hensel Mercedes. That's because, as I mentioned to you guys last week, Hensel wasn't able to access his account before, and what I mean by access is his password. He couldn't find it. He doesn't have the password to that email, so he had to get another email attached to his team. So now he is a co-owner of the team. But unfortunately, Hensel still to this point hasn't made a roster move, hasn't taken Andrew Luck out of the quarterback slot. He hasn't moved that bum ass nigga Blau Powell to the bench, because he has some quality players that he could replace him with, like James White, but he won't do that because he hasn't actually taken a look at his team. Now, that's 2 weeks already that Hensel's given layups to teams. He gave it to Paul last week, and now he gave it to Orlando. You see, the worst part about that is that Hensel's team hasn't even faced the most toughest matchups. There are 5 other teams in this league that have allowed more points. Of course, that allowed term has taken on a new meaning thanks to Ed. Where the fuck is Ed, by the way? Like, Ed's just like totally non-existent. I guess he's waiting for his team to go on some streak so he can pop up again or talk some shit. Or maybe Ed's just a complete extreme. He's either very heavy into the league or he's non-existent. There are 5 other teams that have allowed more points than Hensel's team. Hensel's team has allowed 148 points, but Peggy has allowed 169. Eric has allowed 167. Pedro 173. Dad Bod 238, and Joe has allowed 152. So you can only assume that if Hensel had a regular lineup right now, he could have been 2-0 or 1-1. He would have won. He certainly would have beaten Paul week 1. Absolutely. I mean, Paul with his all-time low of defending champions, and I'll get to Paul in a second. With his all-time low, Hensel would have definitely taken him. And maybe you could argue that he probably wouldn't have beaten O because O scored in the 90s. But nonetheless, he's not doing himself any favors in the points department because, as we all know, points will matter by the end of the season. But it's very early in the season, and anyone can come back from a 0-2 start. Paul, I mentioned just a second ago that I was going to get to you, and you know what? I'm not going to hesitate. I'm just going to go straight at you. Paul has another record, and he's on a roll. Paul is on a roll because he is now he is now the owner of the worst week 2 of any defending champion with 61 points. Paul isn't really representing himself very well here, as Paul was able to get 12 points from Jameis Winston, 15 points from Mike Evans, and the rest of his team really didn't show up. LaShawn McCoy with a 3. What's that name? Kerwin Williams, which I guess is the replacement for David Johnson, put up a 2, and he got a bunch of single-digit performances, and now he's got 61 points. So Paul isn't really holding up his end of the deal, being champion and really representing that fantasy championship the way it's supposed to be represented. Paul, just give up right now. You were fortunate enough to take advantage of the league last year. I don't know, everybody just slept, and everybody fell asleep at the wheel, and you sort of just took over for a week or two in the championship round. But it's time for you to give it up, because obviously you don't deserve it. Let's move on to next week's games here as we move on to week 3. Well, no, actually, I'm sorry. Let's look over the week 2 results. Dad Bod loses to Team Peggy 99-14. I got an amazing performance from CJ Anderson. Very good performance by Todd Gurley. And my kicker got 14 points, which, like I said last week with Dro, when your kicker scores in the teens, it's very difficult to beat you. 26 points for Michael Crabtree for Jay. A whack-ass 12 points for Marcus Mariota. And 15 points from Devontae Adams, but it was not enough to beat Team Peggy. As I said, Paul falls short against Eric, 76-61. Turtle Power beats Fuck You, 91-36. Hensel needs to get his fucking shit together and do something with his squad. Ed defeats Andy. Andy defeats Ed 92-68. 17 points from Aaron Rodgers, 12 points from Jay Ajayi, 15 from Martavius Bryant, 16 points from Travis Kelce, who had that fucking amazing touchdown where he just jumped over a player like for fucking 5 yards. It seems like he was flying to the end zone. Meanwhile, Ed gets 15 points from Alshon Jeffrey, and really nothing else to write home about. And Joe defeats Big Apple. Bullshit. Defeats Big Apple 106-90. I am the highest scoring team of the week. Hensel manages to be the lowest scoring team of the week. Though, if you ask me, I would consider Paul to be the lowest scoring team because he actually participated and he only put up 61. Fuck you, Paul. As we move on to next week, this is the much anticipated matchup between Paul and I. At the moment, I am projected to get 95 points. Hold on, let me see this. I'm projected to get 95 points to Paul's 80. And I got to tell you something, Paul. I like my matchups. I don't think you should feel too good about Tampa Bay versus Minnesota, considering the fact that that's where you depend on the bulk of your points. That definitely was the case last week. I don't think you like the matchup of Denver versus LaShawn McCoy. You might have something with Christian McCaffrey against the New Orleans Saints. But I've got the matchups here. I got Todd Gurley going up Thursday night against the San Francisco 49ers. I've got Leonard Fournette against the Baltimore Ravens. I've got C.J. Anderson against the Buffalo Bills. I've got Antonio Brown against the Chicago fucking Bears. This isn't going to end well for you, Paul. I really feel that you're going to start off the season 1-2. And as we move on to the other matchups, Pedro versus Fuck You, Orlando versus Eric. We've got Andy versus Joe, and Dad Bod against Ed. So this was your week 2 recap. If I sound a bit monotone, you'll have to excuse me. It is approximately 12:13 a.m., and that shitty trade is about to go through in about 20 minutes. Joe, you have horrible managerial skills. Jay, you should be ashamed of yourself for making that trade and taking advantage of Joe's lack of care for his team. As always, may your quarterbacks get hurt before they leave the locker room. May your running backs pull their hamstrings, and may your wide receivers get arrested for marijuana possession. Go fuck yourselves.